Hot Water History, episode 176, Thursday night. Richard, what's going on?
Chopping down Dorian Oaks here on St. Boniface Day.
I'll tell you what, last week I predicted that we would have an amazing Meanwhile in Oak Park because of the start of Pride Month, and we have a unbelievable Meanwhile in Oak Park.
It got
So
spicy.
stick around or skip to that part if you don't want to listen to the rest of,
Hmm.
of this. If you're a Meanwhile in Oak Park listener only, which
Gotcha.
there might be a handful of those, I think, because they always bring up that segment. So
Yeah,
you can skip to the end for that. But it's gonna be a good week.
that's great. Can't wait. Can't wait.
But I know we wanted to talk more about uh, two prominent figures in, I don't know, this weird realm of stuff that we talk about and care about so deeply. Bishop Barron and Tucker Carlson came
Yeah.
together to have an interview. And so before this interview, I know you have some thoughts on Bishop Barron
Hmm.
that I don't know. I know it's come up here and there, but what's your scouting report on Bishop Barron?
It hasn't changed since last time we talked on the podcast, and we've had general discussions about him and his ministry, Word on Fire, as well as his Catholicism series, the video series that was created and then spread for wide distribution and sale. I don't know if there's a bougie middle class to higher or upper class Catholic parish who hasn't been subjected to the Catholicism series. That's not to say, and this is where this qualifier will sound quite damning by simply milk toast verbiage and adjectives, is that Bishop Barrett's fine. I mean, what I mean by that is he's fine for a very middle to upper class, middle class outreach parish wherein the people are looking for a comfortable Catholicism that is both intellectually stimulating. He is very intelligent. He proof texts with the best of them. And what I mean by proof text is that he's able to not just cite elements within scripture that are part of that he implements into his apologetics, but and his ecclesiology. And we'll talk a little bit more about his ecclesiology as we go on within the episode, I'm sure. But as I'm in full agreement with Chris Jackson on his Substack about how he's not the bishop. This is going to sound very Batmanish and Dark
I know
Knightish.
what you're gonna say.
He's not the bishop we need right now. And maybe that's a greater insult than if I said he was a heretic. Now, some of his viewpoints are heretical. A case in point, number one bugaboo that has been a feature and a fixture of his doctrinal expounding and exposition, as well as his exegesis, is that he said that hell either doesn't exist or it's simply empty. And that in this already declared element of what's called Origenism, because it was part of the speculative theology of the great church father, though not a saint, and that is Origen. And Origen speculated way back in the third century that in the end, the potential, not just the potential, but the possibility, even probability of the redemption of all souls, even those who have been banished and damned to hell, as well as even the demons and Lucifer himself, is a possibility. You see? And Barron has very much, if he hasn't said that he embraces Origenism, at least in that aspect of his eschatology and metaphysics, well, then he's rubbed up very close to it or bumped up against it on numerous occasions. So he has this tendency to sound. This is why I call him a careerist, is because he will sound amenable to whoever his audience is. So when he's speaking before a more progressive audience or forum, he will he'll embrace and speak of the value of the development of doctrine. He did this with Tucker. He talked a lot about John Henry Newman's feature of development of doctrine and the evolution of it rather than alteration of it in essence. And that rings in the ears of modernists. When he's speaking to, and he'll also then be much more forthright about his kind of universalism. And what do we mean by universalism within the church is, or within, and it's an abhorrent error within the theology of some Catholic prelates, and this is Father Barron, and now Bishop Barron would be one of them, is his famous interview with Ben Shapiro. He had an opportunity, as Ben Shapiro asked him about soteriological things, salvation, salvific issues. And Shapiro asked him point blank, I keep the law. I keep more than 10 commandments. I keep all of the commandments of the old law, the Mosaic law. At which point, of course, a St. Paul figure, a Pauline figure would say, stop. You have your redemption in the blood of the Savior who has atoned as expiation for your sins, and the sacrifice this is the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity. And there's no salvation outside of him. That's what a Pauline response would be. So convert, Jew, would be and Paul could say that because he was, as Paul said in his own words, I was the worst of them in the persecution of the body of Christ.
Right.
I am the least of the apostles. But notice he recognizes he's an apostle because he is sent, just like the 12, to be a servant of the bride of Christ and then save souls through his missionary exploits. But Bishop Barron, he doesn't do that. He said, oh, no, you don't have to worry. No, he has to worry. And an outright rejection. And yes, of course, there is the baptism by desire. There is baptism by blood. And then there is baptism like white baptism, which is baptism in the ordinary sense by washing through the sacrament of the contemptible effects and condemnable effects of original sin. But those are not things you simply chalk up that Ben Shapiro is going to, at the very last nanosecond of his life and consciousness on earth, is going to all of a sudden gain baptism by desire or martyrdom for that matter. So it's these aspects that really render much of, and here's where I'm with Timothy Gordon here because he's had one very powerful episode on the resultant outcome of the Tucker interview with Bishop Barron. It was exactly what you would expect from Bishop Barron. It's Catholicism sounding attractive, but not transformative. It's Catholicism that makes sense, but lacks the mystical. It's Catholicism that is beautiful, as his whole series on Word on Fire, well, most of it is, in its preaching, in its exegesis, and also the video series on Catholicism. It shows the grandeur of the church. It's attractive, but it's not transcendent. So that's why I say with Christopher Nolan-esque tones that he's the bishop we don't need right now. Because, and if you would go ahead and we can read that quote from Chris Jackson's Substack, it was an accurate summation. I'm of, while you're pulling that up, I'm of two minds, if you will, regarding the fact that he doesn't know in rote fashion the St. Michael the Archangel prayer.
Okay. I want to talk about this.
Okay. So
because this part I want to talk
did it
about.
bother you? I was interested about your reaction to that.
Because I was listening to it in the car. That's the one part where I'm not saying, I don't want to be prideful. I'm not saying I'm not even at the level you're at as far as being a black belt with, I would say I'm like a purple belt as far as catechism, knowing prayers. If you were to give me Latin, I wouldn't know a whole lot, right? So I'm not trying to say like I'm passing all of the tests on that.
Yes.
But the St. Michael prayer, which he alluded to earlier in the episode, where he says, when he mentioned Pope Leo the 13th, talking about the origin of the prayer and said it's it's still said in many churches still today. Did you catch
Correct.
that part?
Yeah, right. As if there's this other element that is out there saying this prayer, but
Yeah. And Tucker's not Catholic, and he's pretty innocently asking a lot of these questions. A lot of the times, Tucker he'll do the whole play dumb thing just to get
right.
to pry more out. I actually
Yes.
felt a genuine curiosity out of a lot of the questions because he's not Catholic and he doesn't know this stuff. He asked
Yes.
what the rosary was.
Yes.
So a lot of it is just very innocent. I thought a lot of the questioning was very
Mm,
innocent and
yes.
trying to learn more. But
Right.
Bishop Barron mentions the St. Michael prayer, how it's used in many churches. To a non-Catholic, that's very confusing. What do you mean many churches? What
Yes.
churches are saying that? What churches aren't saying it?
Correct.
Why do some churches say one prayer but some don't?
Well, and that's why he's constantly pussy. That's the best. He's very evasive. I mean, remember from the start of the interview, Tucker says that, and this is where I fault Tucker in part. But I got the sense too that when Tucker said, I, if you remember from the very beginning, he said, I cannot overstate the response that I've gotten from people both wanting you to be on the show, but also Catholics themselves who want very clear answers from you about the various sides and factions and dilemmas facing the church right now. But we're not going to, then he goes, but we're not going to get into those. And then Barron goes, yeah, that's good. That's great. I don't want to get into those either. That in and of itself would throw up red flag. To my mind, it threw up red flag after red flag. It's just this absurd unwillingness and reticence and absolute, in times, refusal to recognize how deeply divided the Church of Christ is and why that division exists. And that there are factions. It's not as simple as that you're a believing bishop or you're a conciliar or a communal bishop after Vatican II. Do you not see that the devastation wrought in part by and in the aftermath and spirit of the council, and then the modernism that has infected the church, and he just wants to attribute all of these things to these external forces that are waging war and slinging arrows at the walls of the church, and that like all of us as Catholics are like either succumbing to their temptations or letting our guard down to allow sin to enter into the church through our own vicious living or lack of virtue. And yet, so he'll never admit that there's been an infiltration of the church. Now he talked about think about what he attributed to when he said, Tucker asked him why
The
there
clergy
was such
sex
a
scandal. And he
yes.
blames it on the
He
sexual
said it's the
revolution.
sex scandal, and what was, and then he said the sexual revolution. Well, wait a second. Why is the church succumbing to the sexual revolution? That's the next question that they don't ask, and he'll never answer.
That was problematic as well. But we should go
Yes.
back to the St. Michael prayer. Can we talk
Okay,
about
please
this?
go. Yes.
Because we listen to it. I don't know how many people listen to it, but essentially, Tucker's asking about the St. Michael prayer, and Bishop Barron saying this is a prayer said at many churches, because of Pope Leo the 13th, and he talks about the beauty and stuff. Tucker asks him, "What's this prayer?" And Bishop Barron says, I don't know the exact." He says, "Saint Michael, the
The
archangel,
archangel
defend us
defend
in
us in
battle."
battle.
I don't know.
Yeah, and then
I'm
something
not. He
about
said something like, "I'm not going to get it exactly word for word," but talking about um, Satan's minions in the world and
mhm.
asking God to rid of them.
Yes. No good.
I mean, what a beautiful moment
That's
because the St. Michael
that's
prayer is
E6. Your shortstop's supposed to make that play, right?
the
Your
St. Michael
shortstop
prayer.
who's held up as a star on your team and
No,
one of the
it's
most visible figures in the American church, despite the fact that he's only a bishop, he's not an archbishop, he's not a cardinal or anything like that. But he taught for years at Mundelein Seminary. He's written several books. I've read some of them. He wrote a book on St. Thomas as a spiritual master that I thought was meh, right? He knows it. This is what I call why I referred to him as the careerist proof texter, because he can cite wisdom because he knows that there's a proof text that he can use to make his point, and he's probably done this 100 times out of practice, correct? And then he can cite Gerard Manley Hopkins and Plato's Republic because he's learned and he knows that he's able to glean these little snippets that support his disposition. But when it comes down to sticking it out and being a bishop who's willing to die on the cross of orthodoxy, no chance. He will flee. He will flee because he runs as it is. He runs as it is. He cannot be the bold missionary, bishop, theologian, converter of souls that Christ calls him to, because that's just not who he is. It's not how he's built. He's had a comfortable life, both in growing up in the rich western suburb of Chicago. He's had every plum job that he could probably want or have his eyes on. It's just, it's not there. He might run a series called The Word on Fire, but you don't get the sense that he would be on fire for defending the deep, mystical, powerful requirements of the faith. So,
E6 is a good way of putting it.
yeah,
It's a make or miss league.
correct.
And it would have been a beautiful moment to be able to complete a beautiful
Barron's
prayer. And it
Barron's
doesn't take that
fine.
long.
He's fine. He's like a quadruple A player or someone who you have on your bench to bring out for when
I'll pull this back up.
the pitcher's throwing up, easy bougie points about, you know, ooh, what should we think of Catholicism with all of its wealth and churches and stuff like that? Well, then he has an answer to that. You
But
see,
that's the thing. I think he's better than that. And I think that's what's frustrating.
there were points.
I think he's the middle of the pack starter that could be a superstar.
Yes, but he refuses to throw his best pitch for fear he could get hit and then it's ruined from that point on.
I see him more like that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll pull this back up. You can read this.
So this is a headline from Chris Jackson. I also sent you, if you could even look in your DMs, a longer um,
Is this
excerpt from.
just the Substack?
No, because I sent you a paragraph.
You're right.
I can make sure I send it to you, but it's like 2 paragraphs long. Here I can pull it up. Um, did I send it to you? I thought I did. Um,
You
okay, yeah,
quoted the Substack. I can read it.
yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, so it's in the blue box, I think. Do you see
That's
it?
not to say Barron's points
Yes,
weren't
that's the
occasionally
one.
okay. That's not to say Barron's points weren't occasionally interesting. They were. He's not a dumb man. He's read a great deal. He knows how to sprinkle in Hopkins and Aquinas. But what's missing from Barron's performance is what's always missing from his brand of boomer apologetics.
That's it.
The prophetic clarity to name the crisis for what it is and to actually do something about it.
Correct.
Instead, we get the same old trick that has defined Barron's entire ministry: diagnose the disease with great intelligence, then prescribe a placebo.
That's that's exactly Robert Barron. It's exactly Robert Barron. So I don't think he's a mid-level starter. In fact, his his milk toast evangelism, it definitely plays to the boomer choir. It definitely plays to the boomer choir. And I'm sure that what has contributed in no small part to his elevation up the ranks all the way to bishop has been his ability to raise funds because of his outreach and programs, both Word on Fire, the Catholicism series, and the things he continues to work on. But for a man who has access to represent Catholicism on a stage like Tucker Carlson or Joe Rogan or Ben Shapiro. And and he was, by the way, there was a really cool exchange wherein he and Shia LaBeouf had a recorded interview. And Shia LaBeouf says, Bishop, I'm really attracted. What has transformed me as he was doing the Padre Pio movie was his understanding and immersion into the Latin
I
Mass.
remember this.
And Barron's like, why do you like the Latin Mass? See that antagonism toward what is most elevated and traditional rather than modern. And see, even when he was talking about, like, a case in point would be um when he was talking, what was the point that he was making about the old liturgy? I can't remember. Oh no, he was saying something about the architecture, right? How the he was making a valid point about how the architecture is like going into a bank in the churches now,
Yeah.
right? That it's a witty observation. It's true. And it certainly doesn't prepare you for a transcendent experience as the old cathedrals, churches, Gothic and Romanesque did. That's clear. That's as clear as day. But he doesn't go in to say, well, why is it that a church that's supposed to be the the guarantor and protector of the deposit of faith handed on from Christ to the apostles to us and then his successive bishops in the hierarchy, with the visible sign of unity being the Pope himself. Notice how Francis played. No, there was no Francis here. Tucker kind of kept pushing him toward, well, the church turned very liberal. Why is that? So again, toward Chris Jackson's point, Barron goes on this long explanation and development of all of the effects, but he doesn't get into the cause, except that he'll say something along the lines of, well, it was secularism or the sexual revolution. But those are things that are clearly extrinsic to the church's theology or directly antagonistic and antithetical to it. So why did the church embrace it? And he references, well, some priests were told that we can't be so condemnatory of sexual sins, so we have this allowance. Why did all of a sudden it become attractive to have priests and prelates and theologians in theologates and seminaries teaching their seminarians that sexual deviancy is somehow now permissible or less egregious than it always was considered? I mean, in other words, we need a Peter Claver and a Peter Damian asking why is it that all you homosexualists love going up the ranks into the church so much? Just get out. Your presence is contemptible to God. That we need a Peter Damian. We don't need Bishop Barron trying to hem and haw his way. And by the way, in hemming and hawing the way through and trying to equivocate and waver and accommodate all of these apostasy based claims or heretical assertions, it doesn't lead to radical conversion. It really doesn't.
No.
It doesn't provide that martyroi, that witness. Martyr means witness. It doesn't provide that witness that transforms a soul and moves and compels them. I see that a lot more in Scott Hahn. I see that a lot more in even someone like Timothy Gordon, who, yeah, he's going to push the envelope, but at least he's going to be clear and distinctive. We don't need mealy mouth Catholicism. We need hardcore Catholicism. The door is there. Enter through. Present what's inside as salvific, as the basis of happiness, temporal and eternal, and present Christ as he has revealed himself in scripture and tradition, with no ifs, ands, buts, or hemming and hawing about it, and open the door. And then for those who don't want to hear it, who are already inside the building, the door swings both ways.
The prescribe a placebo
Hmm.
line.
Yes. You think you're being treated. No, notice too, what other popped in my mind? No mention of the church's failure during COVID. That the how could he not ask?
Because the
Here's where.
numbers are going up now.
Well, yeah, but think about where they would be if the
Oh,
church
I
took a
know. I agree
principle.
with you.
Yes,
Right.
yes, I know. But how could Tucker Carlson not ask him the question? This is why when you made your point to me online when we were conversing about this, that it's almost as if they're both owned and controlled opposition.
I don't know
I
if
took that to heart.
that was a little
I know that you're maybe
half
being
joking, but it does
you're
feel
probably being hyperbolic, but it does illustrate something.
they're very gatekeepery.
Yes, that's it.
And the boomers they stay in the gates. You know,
Correct.
they don't.
They're not, and they like being in the gates. And what Barron does is reaffirm their allegiance and say, okay, that's why I'm Catholic. Look at that beautiful cathedral, or look at that the church has scholastic theology, or the faith makes sense. Okay, but they're the last persons that are going to be up on the ramparts, slinging the arrows back at modernism, Gnosticism, New Age bullshit. They're not going to be on the front lines. They're going to be the ones that when Cardinal Bernardine is brought up, or when Pope Leo even asserts that there are three great Catholic bishops that you should be aware of in their consistent theology and the seamless garment of life, which is in and of itself absolute heresy. That we really should, that there is no, we should equate care for the poor, war, capital punishment with concern about the unborn as their slaughter continues. That is absolute contrary to the faith. It was repudiated by even John Paul II himself decades ago, over and over again. This compromise regarding let's just find common ground with those who are uncomfortable. We can always assert that Catholics for choice, they're not that bad, correct? And when they bring up that, capital punishment is really just as bad, if not worse, than abortion, or all of these, yeah, milk toast, gross distortions of the faith, Bishop Barron's there to let's dialogue. Let's have the conversation.
Oh, that's.
That's it.
I'm not going that far.
Yes, he is.
I'm not going OP. You just went OP.
Mm. Well, I'm there.
This Zoom meeting is about to run out. We're
Yeah,
gonna have
why
to
is
hop on
that?
another one. Okay, it's a long story. Shout out. I'm wearing this different. Shout out Praxis.
We go
But
Praxis.
I was a mentor for a couple months, and as part of being a mentor, you get free Zoom Premium, which is a sweet deal.
Mm.
And so now the year it's Praxis has changed its program, so it's the calendar is closer to a school year now,
Gotcha.
and they pulled the plug, and I just didn't know. They pulled the rug right from under me, and now we're getting alerted that
I was wondering, I got a little distracted there. That's why I was hemming and hawing,
I
trying to
know,
remember out the architecture. I saw the time left and thinking, oh,
I
what's
know.
that about?
We got the 10-minute warning. We haven't gotten that in like 3 years. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'll have
Well, are we
to
gonna
I'll
game the system and we'll just stop and then pick up where?
that's what we'll do. I'll have to get
Amen.
My Zoom re-up.
Yeah.
But let me figure that out right now. So
Well, you don't have.
We'll hop
Yeah.
off and hop back on.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, sounds good.
I like what you said about Bishop Barron, the good word to use. Fine.
Yes, he's fine. Not like he's fine. No, not like that.
No, I know. Let me pull this back up.
And Chris Jackson, to his credit, has been all over this. His piece from his Substack is fantastic, and you should follow him at a Big Modernism. But go ahead and read what he is a great just snippet encapsulation of the whole experience.
Tucker Carlson asked about hell, apostasy, and why the world hates Christ. Bishop Barron gave him baseball stories, Bob Dylan lyrics, and von Balthasar.
Yes, right.
So I think that's a little uncharitable, but after he
Mhm.
explains the full, I just think it's a little clickbaity to get
Well,
because
yes,
this
should
is a hook to
so.
get open up the Substack.
Correct.
But the actual paragraph was better, a much better breakdown, I
Right.
would say. and fine is a good word to
Hmm.
use.
Yes.
Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I wanted to check back with you about you said you well, when I asked that we could do this episode on or as a reaction to the Barron response. Oh, did you notice too? I wanted to bring up that whole discussion of usury. You know, that's a big issue for Tucker, and he's been pushing that. He thinks that just any loaning of money essentially is demonic and sinful and vicious. But that is where there has been an insightful, beautiful development of doctrine that much more closely aligns with the gospel than the hardline anti-usury position that started to develop, especially under Jansenism and before that. So there was a chance where he could say, well, this is an excellent example of the development of doctrine, which was allows us to be much more closely faithful to the gospel message and Jesus's own economic understanding, or more not his economic understanding, his own enunciation and preaching of truth regarding when you are to loan out money, how that's to take place, what's to transpire in the open and free contractual agreement. I just fear, and it just might be my own dispositions and sympathies and concerns about even Leo the 14th. And it goes back to if Bishop Barron, because they hemmed and hawed about and equivocated, which is what Barron does the best, about Rerum Novarum, and he did say that there's a passionate defense in Rerum Novarum by Leo XIII of private property, but then he can't resist to say, "Oh, left." This is what he was saying in the background. This is by implication. Leftists, don't worry. I'm not some sort of hard right wing Lockean, and I'm not going to go down. I'm not going to want to sound like Murray Rothbard, which I'm sure he hasn't read Mises or Rothbard. But let's just go and say that. But I don't we can't he goes we just can't have laissez-faire as if again he's attributing laissez-faire or defining laissez-faire as anarchy in the pejorative sense. That is not what laissez-faire is. No advocate of laissez-faire
I
economics
remember
is
this.
saying that. So he just dog whistles to the left and he dog whistles when it's important to the right. And so all the dogs are kind of, but it's not a dog whistling in the sense of he sort of it's a dog whistling that pacifies the dogs on both sides and makes them think, well, he's sort of on our side. Let's give him that point. But he has his foot in these two camps that are so antithetical and unable to coexist that it just renders everything mushy. It's jello. It's jello. You can't nail him down on anything. So that's what I'm left with. But along those lines, I just wanted to get your take on it because I did force you to listen to it. I used coercion, God forbid, to or an element of coercion to see if Charlie would listen to it. Your initial stance was, "Oh God, you're putting me through this," but I wanted to get your reactions.
Yeah, I was being a little dramatic. It ended up being obviously a great topic for us because it covered a lot of the bases that we cover as well. So
Hmm.
that was a good part. But it was better than I thought it would be.
Okay.
I will say that. But I keep going back to what you said to start out that he's fought. That
Yes. And
that's really there's not really much to say beyond that. That he's
correct.
okay. He's okay.
Yes, he's okay. And it just seems to me that we need a lot better than okay.
Hmm.
There are just so many unending, powerful, countervailing forces, and a deep lack of recognition that those often come from powers that are not just simply like accidentally enemies of the church, right? It's not as though Freemasons are just, whoops, when I believe in modernistic linear progression and scientific advancement. And it just so happens that the church is, I can paint it as something that's not, and therefore I hate the church. And that they're just oopsie mistaken. No, they're satanic, they're modernistic, and they are hell bent on destroying the church from at its foundation. And their Satanism and their, in part, their allegiance with all of the terrible movements of the time, including moral relativism, is not just in part, but intrinsically aimed at crushing the faith. It's not just simply that you know, they're unfortunately mistaken. That doesn't fly anymore. And same thing with Zionistic Jews, right? They're oopsie. They're still they're still God's chosen people. And it always makes you wonder where his funding's coming from, right? I mean, to the point where you're like, well, you have these descriptions of, the two individuals that were supposedly killed, the young people in Washington, they were actually, although they were working for Israel, they were what were called Messianic Jews. They were killed by that terrorist from Chicago, in Washington, the young couple, and they're Messianic Jews, which would otherwise be known as Christians. But you wonder if he's just, he could, again, he would find himself very comfortable in having a, a forum with a rabbi, and he wouldn't challenge the rabbi to convert. You see, it's this whole Francis Church, you're fine where you are, that is so wholly part and parcel of there's no greater word that's feared and loathed by those who ascribe to the Francis Church and the conciliar church post-Vatican Council than proselytism. Evangelism and what is so wrong about proselytism? I just don't understand why that's such a bugaboo word. Why is that wrong? We're supposed to proselytize. We're Otherwise, we have, as Christ says, we're just this lantern that we put under a bushel basket. Just extinguish it, after all. It's just wasting time. And then you ponder his words in Revelation 3:13, the lukewarm I spit out of my mouth. I detest them. It's just, yeah, I, I guess my feeling is he's fine, and I just don't have time for it.
Mm.
We don't have time for it, right?
I think that's the sentiment I got before listening to the
Hmm.
episode when I sent you that.
Yeah.
That I kind of know where this is going.
Hmm.
There's not going to be anything that shocks me. What did shock me, I was wrong about that. What did shock me was the St. Michael part. That part
Yes.
stunned me.
Hmm.
But I like the usury part with Tucker. You're right. He's very economically Puritan. I
Yes.
think is
Right.
the right way to put that.
Yeah. And again, someone, a good Catholic economist would point out to Tucker, what you're essentially calling for is the extinguishing of capital markets.
Right.
You are calling for the end of entrepreneurial investment. Nothing short of it. So
Any
what?
speculation,
Correct.
any
And
bets on growth in the
and
long term.
Mises has this beautiful paragraph in Human Action, and Rothbard. I'm still reading and working my way through Man, Economy, and State, and Rothbard is even more forceful. And Mises says, we tend to label or use pejorative terms that have outwardly negative connotations, like speculator, as if someone who's buying oil futures or pork belly options or futures, whatever they're doing, that they're somehow gaming the system and robbing people, robbing the hog farmer or ranch. I guess they don't ranch, but the hog farmer, or you're robbing the guy who's digging a well. No, with all a speculator is, Mises says, is an entrepreneur by any other name. They're taking on a risk with their already properly gained capital, and they are responsible for the loss. Without their taking on proper risk and forecasting, there's no capital good and capital structure by which the laborers on the ground, whether they're building the derrick and maintaining it or feeding the hogs, can therefore profit or, for that matter, engage in the network of capital markets so that they can bring the fruits of their labor, their product, to a wanting market. And more importantly, as Rothbard, as I'm reading right now in Man, Economy, and State, more importantly, attain a truly just price that allows for profit and advancement for them. Without those speculators and entrepreneurs, there's nothing like that. You're engaged in autarkic, or what Rothbard calls autistic exchange, because you're just or almost drawn to barter or face to face exchange, which doesn't allow for the dynamism of a division of labor and expertise to flourish in different sectors of social interaction and cooperation. If you don't have people loaning out money and allowing their capital to be used by other experts in their field for the advancement of those markets and thus the consumers and producers operating within them, you have a Stone Age economy.
Right. Is that all on Tucker
Yeah,
and Bishop
let's
Barron?
right. And frankly, yeah, maybe we've been a little harsh on Barron.
I think
I didn't.
so, but I think he's
I
fine.
yeah, okay. But beyond that, and maybe it was just born of Tucker has this naive, dopey. Well, he kind of, oh shucks, what is that? What's the rosary? Which are fine questions, and I'm not saying that they're insincere. I think they were sincere, and it is he is operating out of a place of virtuous ignorance in many of. I don't think that was disingenuine, but from the onset, when you begin an interview saying we're not going to address this huge elephant in the room
Right.
that so many people want the guests to address, that diffused the what could have been a really revelatory and challenging interview. I I would like to press Barron. Tucker doesn't have the wherewithal, the knowledge, the background, both in Catholicism and outside of it, to press and challenge Barron in a truly kind of Thomistic or scholastic sense. Here's my assertion. What say you? Here are the objections, right? As Thomas would do it in the Summa or the Summa Contra Gentiles, or Peter Lombard would do it. And then break down, as Anselm would do it, and break down logically what is the answer or most compelling response. What Barron likes to do is show you how smart he is by arguments of authority. This is what Bob Dylan said. For him, that's an authority, right? Or this is what my baseball coach when I was in Little League said. And we're all supposed to go, wow, that's a profound point. Smell the
I don't see.
grass.
That's where I think we get a little unfair.
No, I don't think it's unfair because it's diversionary. Get to the matter. Get to the matter. It's time to take it's not time. It's time to take sides. You gotta take sides. You can't be on the sidelines.
This part I agree with.
You can't be on the sidelines. I'm sick of the sideline people because the sideline people, for a world that is starving for divine revelation and redemption, a world that's starving for the way, the truth, and the life. Here's Barron saying, well, yeah, Christianity has a privileged place among the many ways. It's like, no, get off. That is not a good teammate. He's fine. He could come in and maybe spell a starter once in a while, in the baseball analogy, but he's not going to go the distance. He's not going to be Tariq Skubal, and he's certainly not going to win a Cy Young Award. Leo the 13th, Pope, or I'm sorry, uh, Pope Pius the 10th, Pope Pius the 5th. Those are the Cy Youngs. And another Cy Young, whose feast day we celebrate today, who said, all right, speak about someone who doesn't want it, who doesn't or didn't sit on the sideline. When he goes to convert the pagan, goes to convert from England, the pagans of Germany, and the pagans are like, well, look at our gods. Look at what our gods could do. Look at this mighty Dorian oak from which we worship our gods. And what does Boniface do? He takes a freaking axe to it and burns it, right? He didn't sit on the sideline.
Right.
That's the work of a great man, not Ben Shapiro. You're fine. Just stay where you are.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about a town that's not fine?
You know, I always do.
The people segment. Here it is.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
And
We go to your gay suburb now.
bam.
Meanwhile, in Oak Park, brought to you by Trinity Brewing. The best.
Amen.
Oh, we've got a good one. What do I want to start out with? Let's start here. This one's probably the least out of the three.
Oh,
OP,
zoning.
OP Board approves dual use zoning for places of worship. They will now be allowed to seek permission to convert parts of their buildings into rentals to offset expenses as congregations shrink.
And there's St. Edmund's, right? Oh no, it's Grace Episcopal.
Grace Episcopal.
Yeah.
Places of worship in Oak Park may now seek special use approval to convert parts of their buildings into rental units in order to help make ends meet. At its June 3rd meeting, Oak Park's Village Board unanimously approved a special use amendment to the village's zoning code, opening the door for churches to rent out parts to their buildings to either residential or business tenants. To qualify, the house of worship's main sanctuary must still be in use by a congregation.
This is weird. Why can't a church just do whatever it wants with its property? This is that's one of the most insidious things about zoning. It just it
It's worse
makes
than
people feel
war. It's worse than
comfortable.
war, right?
Yes. It makes people feel comfortable. And it also is a very backhanded and sinister way to, again, acquiesce or promote acquiescence to the state. Like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Someone's got to tell the churches. No, why? Why? It's their property.
The amendment comes after leaders of a local congregation approached the village, saying that a dip in their congregation's numbers was making maintaining their building difficult, according to Oak Park Development Services Director Craig Filler. Quote,
Mainline Protestants are worried that their churches are going to just be blown up.
quote, this text amendment could bring benefit to or consideration for any place of worship that's in a similar situation. While the amendment applies to houses of worship in all residential zones and business districts, it does not give houses of worship the ability to build on additions for the purpose of renting out space.
Ay, ay, ay.
The amendment aims to help churches remain open in the village even as congregations shrink and building costs rise.
This
Quote,
reminds me of, you ever go to, for example, a great example of this is downtown Louisville. If you go down downtown Louisville, there was an initiative undertaken to, they had these beautiful old 19th century facades.
what do you mean downtown Louisville?
Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, sorry. I thought you
Yes.
said Louisiana. Sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
Louisville, Kentucky. And so what they did was they passed ordinances that anyone who would build in the area, they could tear down all the buildings, but they had to keep the facades up, right? So
Right.
they could, it could be a distillery, it could be Duluth Trading Company, whatever it is, the store that goes in there, they keep the facades up, but in the back, there's something totally different. This is just gilded. This is gilding Oak Park. We're going to make these churches, the facades are going to remain, but the functionality and their reason for being is long gone. Their original reason for being.
Quote, this initiative is occurring as a result of church leaders seeking ways to repurpose church assets in underutilized buildings, staff wrote in a report to the board.
God forbid they actually preach the gospel. Get more people who are in the
The, propo-
congregation.
the proposed amendments would allow congregations facing challenges of declining membership and deferred maintenance to continue to fund their missions and outreach and pay for the upkeep of their buildings while using space that may no longer match the congregation needs. The place of worship dual use amendments allow for creative and flexible changes to uses of church structures, encouraging their preservation in the village in a reasonable manner. The measure didn't require much discussion prior to the board's vote. I think that's a new record, said Village President Vicky Skaman after the board's quick unanimous vote.
Way to go, Vic. Overseeing the dissolution of once vibrant church communities in Oak Park. Of course, it's not Vicky Skaman's fault. It's their own fault.
And it's a new board. It's her board now.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No, talk about rubber stamping.
Out in the Burbs aspires to be Oak Park's Pride Month event.
Oh, boy.
Co-sponsored by the Chamber and the Village, event will bring a full day of Pride programming, that's what they're calling it, to downtown Oak Park. Here it is.
Ay, ay, ay.
Each year, drag queens dazzle downtown Oak Park at the Out in the Burbs Pride event. The Out in the Burbs Pride Month celebration scheduled for June 7th in downtown Oak Park is the result of years of hope and ambition, according to Darian Marion Burton.
No, he did not read that incorrectly, folks. That person's name is Darian Marion. Darian Marion
Darian,
Burton.
Darian Marion
Daryl.
Burton, executive director of, they didn't say of, executive director of the Oak Park River Forest Chamber of Commerce. Marion Burton said he'd hoped to establish a major Pride Month event in Oak Park ever since ascending to a leadership position with the local chamber, aiming to create something that could simultaneously celebrate queer culture and LGBTQ plus inclusion while also promoting Oak Park's economic and tourism interests. Days before the festival's first fully realized edition, he believes Out in the Burbs will prove to be just that. Quote, we have been trying to think about pride at the chamber for 4 years, and I think that really started when I came on as board president. I ran as the first openly queer person in that role, he said. I really wanted us to think about how we educated our businesses about pride. That was successful, and so we said, okay, let's dig into more.
4 years. That's pretty quick on the Oak Park timeline.
The event is they were having the conversation for
Yeah.
a while. The event is co-sponsored by the chamber and the Oak Parks Village government. Marion Burton said the chamber expects to welcome around 3,000 attendees. The festival will be held in a blocked off section of Marion Street. Okay, this part. The event is free to enter, but there's a suggested donation of $10.
Put your tenor in my G string.
The festival will feature an musical lineup featuring queer artists, professional drag performances, a food court and bar, tents for vendors selling handmade goods, queer-owned businesses, and community resource
I'm
organizations.
selling bracelets and dildos.
Marion Burton hopes that Out in the Burbs can grow into a signature event for the village, driving regional tourism and be a beacon of community spirit for the Cook County suburbs.
Or drive normal people away.
Quote, as an organization, we are committed to economic vitality and tourism is a big part of that. He said, I want this to be positioned as a thing for people from Rockford, Milwaukee, people from Chicago that don't like big crowds. There won't be a big crowd. We
Don't
want this
worry
to be,
about it. I
we
think that's the
want,
latest of your worries.
we want this to be something that celebrates queer people and drives tourism.
Drives tourism to every other place other than Oak Park.
Oh, it's going to get dark in a second. Hold on. I read ahead. The festival aims to be the largest Pride event in the near west suburbs this month, but it will hope to enjoy a boost from other events happening in the area this week, including downtown Oak Park's first Thursday event of the summer, Forest Park's June 6th Pride event, and River Forest Pride and Inclusion Walk, which happened Monday evening. I was not there. Marion Burton said he hopes to see the event eventually grow into a multi-day Pride celebration. Here's where it gets kind of dark.
Okay.
Part of the festival's grounds will be dedicated to a teen pride
All
zone,
right. Here's the
open
grooming.
open only to attendees aged 13 to 20, that will feature ice cream, face painting, and more.
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's really important to define more there, isn't it?
That aspect of the event came as a result of Marion Burton meeting with the Pride Club at Oak Park and River Forest High School and fielding suggestions from the students. A 30-year resident of Oak Park, Marion Burton said he hopes that Out in the Burbs will be the kind of community event he wished he had growing up in the village. Quote, I'm doing the stuff that 18-year-old me thought I'd be doing, he said. Now it's actually happening. He said he's also proud of how the chamber's entire leadership structure has committed to investing in the event, particularly at a time where queer inclusion and other diversity efforts face steep political challenges. Not from Oak Park, but
Yeah.
quote, we are saying that as a community, we're bought into this in spite of everything that's going on, he said. It's so ingrained in the values of our community. A large pride event like this hasn't existed in or around Oak Park before, except every year in Chicago.
Every day is so queer there anyway. So
But Marion Burton said it's here to stay. Quote, this event is about making space boldly and joyfully for love, identity, connection, and community. The festival's website reads, it's for the queer kid growing up in Forest Park, the trans couple living in Berwyn, and the ally business owner in Oak Park who wants to stand up and show support.
no, there's an ally there, or there's an alley going on in
I know.
involved too. So Ugh, good. Right.
Yeah,
Well,
we don't need more sideline people. You're right.
right. It, I don't know. I smell the sulfur already. Balls of fiery sulfur.
Group
Okay.
cancels June 14th Pride event. Eyes OP board action. Wants Oak
Wow.
Park to declare itself a queer and transgender sanctuary city.
Hey, Aaron McManus, he's appeared before.
Oh, he's
Wow.
made a cameo.
Wasn't he the one that changed his gender
The
4 times in a
pronouns.
paragraph?
The pronouns.
Yeah. Wow. Nice dress he's wearing.
The organizers behind Oak Park's 2025 Trans Day of Visibility event have canceled the Oak Park Pride event they were planning, but still plan to make their inclusivity goals for the village known in other ways this month. Organizer Aaron McManus said the event organizers didn't want to compete with Out in the Burbs, the Chamber of Commerce and Village sponsored Pride Month event taking place that we just talked about. Quote, we wanted to focus on a bunch of other stuff and not really compete with the chamber, McManus said. That's definitely not the goal. That led to us saying, let's table it and focus on some real need of the community and move on from there.
How would they be conflicting? It's a week after the other one. I
I don't
don't
know.
get it.
Local tourism, they don't want to do the back to back
Is it-
weeks.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe they just don't realize that there's not a enthusiasm for this shit or as much as they would wanted.
McManus said that the event they'd been helping to plan for June 14th would have been a bit lower key, focused on storytelling and been less business oriented than Out in the Burbs. McManus said the event organizers will now look to put their energy this month into campaigning for the village board to consider adopting an ordinance making Oak Park a queer and transgender sanctuary city. Several
Please,
U.S.
please do.
Several U.S. cities, including Boston, Kansas City, and Sacramento, have passed such ordinances. McManus said they drafted a report on what taking that step could look like for Oak Park and forwarded it to all the trustees, but they haven't heard back from anyone on the board. Quote, we haven't gotten the momentum we wanted, McManus said. They said that they and other supporters of the idea plan to speak about it at June 3rd's village board meeting. We're going to show up and do the public comment exercise and then see how much social media exposure we can get to keep pushing for it. McManus said, I definitely don't want to slow down on this. In a March interview with Wednesday Journal, Oak Park Village President Vicky Skaman said she'd support an ordinance making Oak Park a transgender sanctuary.
Fantastic.
Quote, I think there's additional sense of urgency with the rhetoric coming out of the federal
Again,
government, Skaman said. Here it
just a
is. They love
self-created
this one. I
yeah,
mean, they love this
boogeyman.
one.
Yeah.
Here it is. I think you have to respond to how painful that is for some trans youth. It's life or death.
Oh yeah. Oh man. Yes. Life or death. Again, the trans suicide thing. Or trans murder. Yeah, yeah. Okay. No one's buying it. Vicky. No one's buying it. Is that the segment? Boom.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay? That's the segment.
Good job. But you knew it was going to get wild, and the next few episodes will continue
25
on.
more days. We still got 25 more days.
Yes, the month dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I don't know what
Amen.
else is going on, but I smell
Amen.
the sulfur. I smell it burning. Giant balls emanating from the sky, descending from the sky. Oh well. May they convert. I will continue to pray for these people with deep, deep psychoses.
Amen.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
No, good episode.
Excellent.
That's
Yeah.
all I got.
Yeah. Awesome. Well,
Check
I'm
out the
good.
site, Hot Water History,
Yeah.
and check
Check out the
out
site
Trinity Brewing.
and buy some Trinitine beer, especially with the 4th of July coming up. Still haven't gotten that hazy IPA, but I'm
Oh,
gotta get that. Gotta get that soon.
yeah. You need your re-up.
Amen. All right. God bless you, Charlie.
All right, everyone. Take
Bye.
care.
Peace.